And Siena pollster Steve Greenberg is joining us in the studio tonight. Hello, how are you?
Good, Liz. How are you?
I am well. So I have before me 3 polls.
And tomorrow you'll get a 4th.
I know, this is insane. Poll A, Poll B, and Poll C.
Okay.
Okay, Poll C, the Quinnipiac poll that everybody went, woo, bats over yesterday. 6-point spread between Palatino and Cuomo. Then we have a Survey USA poll, 9-point spread between Palatino and Cuomo. Then we have your poll.
Which was Poll A, by the way, so I'm very happy about that.
Okay, Poll A. Well, just because you're sitting right here in front of me, but 57-24. I mean, those are old school numbers. Those are the numbers that we were looking at beforehand, back when Andrew Cuomo was, you know, heir apparent and had this air of inevitability about him.
Yeah, but you know what? From the voters' perspective, apparently nothing has really changed. These numbers are highly consistent with our August findings. In August, Cuomo had 56% of the vote. The 2 Republicans, Lazio and Palladino, at that point Lazio ahead, had 30% of the vote. Now what we see among registered voters in the state of New York is that Andrew Cuomo's at 57%, up a point, and the 2 Republicans are at 32%. The difference is that Palladino has obviously passed Lazio by, but Palladino on the Republican line is at 24 points, up 10 from last month, and Rick Lazio's at 8 points on the conservative line.
Okay, the Palladino campaign calls your poll suspicious.
Well, I'm shocked that a campaign that is behind in a poll would question a poll. Well, that's never happened before, Liz.
I know, in the history of politics. You seriously, though, really seriously, this is a huge discrepancy. I mean, the Palladino campaign likes the Survey USA poll. They say, you know, we think that is probably the most effective snapshot. The thing about Survey USA is that it's a telephone poll. There's no human being on the other end of the line.
So you don't know who's pushing the buttons and if they're pushing the buttons correctly. I'm a little leery of those kinds of polls. Obviously, the 3 major public college pollsters that do work in New York, Siena, Marist, Quinnipiac, we don't do that. We have live people who make phone calls and speak to live human beings, and we know who they are. I think the difference here between, and so I'm going to leave Survey USA out of it for the moment.
Done.
Look, they did, Q did likely voters. Siena did registered voters. What's the difference? The difference is registered voters are the universe of the 11 million New Yorkers who are registered to vote. Likely voters try to get at the issue of who's going to show up. Right. And we know historically over the last few decades that on election day, in a gubernatorial election year, a little under half of New Yorkers are going to show up and vote. But let's round it off and say about half will vote, about half won't vote. We felt going in the field shortly after Palladino's lopsided primary win that it was still too early to determine likely voters. Why did we say that? Because, first of all, most New Yorkers going into the primary did not know who Carl Palladino is. And what we find right now is that a third of the voters still don't know enough about Carl Palladino to have an opinion about him. When we look at the down ballot races, it's even worse. DiNapoli, Donovan, Schneiderman, most voters don't know any of these candidates. So we thought 6 weeks out, it's a little bit early to be saying who's going to vote, who's not going to vote. I don't think the voters have made that determination yet, whether they're going to participate on November 2nd or not. So we felt it was better to go with registered voters 6 weeks out. We will move to likely voters as it gets closer to election day.
Okay, the thing is that regardless of whether you're right or the Quinnipiac poll is right or even Survey USA is right, the Cuomo campaign has decided to engage because we're seeing them out with a negative ad. And because when you say not enough people say that they know about Carl Palladino, what's this upstate downstate split on that? I mean, Western New Yorkers have a fine idea about who he is.
Certainly Western New Yorkers know who Carl Palladino is, but downstate voters don't. And remember, in a Republican primary, Carl Palladino wasn't advertising in downstate New York. He was advertising in Albany and Rochester and Syracuse and Buffalo and Plattsburgh, etc. Now, when we move to a general election scenario, 60 to 65% of the votes come from the New York City media market.
Right, and that's why Carl Palladino's campaign says they'll be spending between 60 and 70% of their time in New York City
Which is what they need to do, but they haven't done it to this point. Let's put Palladino's huge victory, and I give him all the props in the world for that, but let's put that in a little bit of perspective. 1 out of every 4 voters in this state is a Republican. 1 out of every 5 Republicans actually went and voted in the primary. Not even, but we'll round. So that's 1 out of every 20 voters. He got 2/3 of them, which means he got the support of about 1 out of every 34 New York voters, about 3% of New York voters voted for Carl Palladino in that Republican primary a week ago. New Yorkers are still learning who he is, and particularly downstate New Yorkers don't know who he is. So that's why we decided to go with registered voters for now. There's another major difference, though, I think, between the two polls. Beyond the fact that we included Lazio, they did not. They made it a head-to-head between Palladino and Cuomo. We included Lazio.
Prematurely, we should say, because Lazio has not said.
For the moment, he is the Conservative Party candidate, and as you saw, he got 8% of the vote. There are clearly some voters who don't want to vote for Andrew Cuomo or Carl Palladino.
What does that translate into 8%, roughly, in votes? Do you have any idea?
Well, if we figure roughly a 5 million voters turning out, that would be about 400,000 votes.
Okay, more than enough, it should be said, to hit that 50,000 mark that Mike Long needs. Right, that Mike Long needs to get his official ballot status, to maintain his official ballot status, which explains why he's encouraging Rick Lazio. Rick Lazio is starting to say, well, I'm the voice of reason, I'm the moderate, and you just don't know what Carl Palladino is going to do. And so, therefore, you need a place to go, and so I might stay on the line.
Well, and that may happen, or we may just see in the next few days that he gets off the line. So we'll have to let that play itself out, and we will do, in our next poll, we will try to look like the ballot. So if it's Palladino on the conservative line, we'll drop Lazio out of it. But let me tell you another difference in the two polls. Because we did a poll of registered voters, our sample in terms of party breakout looks like the New York electorate. New York electorate is 49% Democrat, 25% Republican, 21% independent, and about 5% in the minor party lines, working families, conservative, independents party, etc. That's what our sample looks like in today's poll. In the Q poll, if you look at the breakdown of their voters by party registration, they had 36% Democrats, 13 points below their actual enrollment. They had 22% Republican, 3 points below their actual enrollment. They had 31% independents, 10 points above their actual enrollment. They essentially, in their likely voter survey, they are working under the assumption that about 40 to 50% more independents than Republicans will vote on Election Day, and I find that a hard concept to believe.
Okay, but however, let's argue, just for argument's sake, that independents, of course, then we're talking about small I, not Independence Party, people who are not affiliated with either of the major parties, with any party actually. These people are the swing voters. They're the voters, and they are increasingly breaking with the Republicans, are they not, nationally speaking?
Well, but not in New York. In New York, they very much side with the Democrats.
Well, in your poll, not in the Q poll, actually.
Well, but in every Q poll up until today, they did. In every Siena poll this year, they have.
So you saying the Q poll is an anomaly? Is that what you're saying?
I believe that our numbers are far closer to where the New York electorate is today than their numbers.
Okay, well, if that is in fact the case, let's look at some of the down ballot races. Of course, the governor's race is really interesting, fascinating stuff, but let's go down ballot a little bit. We have DiNapoli-Wilson, as you noted. DiNapoli is 51-25, and he's actually, according to your poll, opened up a lead.
He's always had a lead in the low 20s. It's a little bit bigger lead. I think what you're seeing there is really almost straight party line vote. Not completely, because you look at the crosstabs and you see not every Democrat's with DiNapoli, not every Republican's with Wilson, but 51-25 is essentially the party enrollment in the state. These are two candidates who are largely unknown to the voters of this state. Tom DiNapoli has been controller for 3.5 years, yet 2/3 of voters don't know who he is enough to have an opinion.
That's not good.
No, it's not. The good news for DiNapoli is that far more voters, nearly 90%, don't know who Harry Wilson is. Look, I use the analogy, this is sort of like if two candidates go out there and campaign and the voters don't pay attention, can you really call it a campaign? That's what we have going on here. It's the tree falling in the forest. These guys are flying under the radar screen. That's probably good news for Tom DiNapoli, given the makeup of the electorate in New York.
Right. I mean, but Wilson is actually widely considered the Republicans' best hope of a victory in statewide elections.
Although I would say right now that the Republicans' best shot of a victory in a statewide race would be Attorney General.
Now that's interesting. Why do you say that?
Well, because what we found is that Schneiderman has a lead, but only 13 points. He's ahead of Donovan 45 to 32. So he's got a 13-point lead, but he is well below that magic 50 that you need to actually win the race. Eric Schneiderman is much more well-known in New York City coming off of his Democratic primary victory. Dan Donovan, if he has the resources to get out there, he is unknown to voters. I think that is the Republicans' best shot to win an election.
Interesting. And also you've got both of the senators, the U.S. senators here with wide, very wide. I mean, Schumer 63-30, Gillibrand 57-31. You know, now, again, there are discrepancies between your poll and other polls that show the Gillibrand-Giaguardi race actually quite a bit closer. And we're seeing her surrogates come out hard today in favor of her, so they might have a little bit of a concern.
Well, they should be, you know, whether you're 4 points up or 40 points up, if you take the electorate for granted, if you take your opponent for granted, you're going to be in trouble. So I think they're smart to be aggressive, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, ahead or behind. That's what campaigns are all about. They should be aggressive in their campaign. But look, a year and a half after being appointed senator, Gillibrand now has the strongest numbers she's ever had. Best favorability rating, strongest in the horse race against Giaguardi, and best generic re-elect number that she's ever had.
And we should say that you are going back in the field for state Senate races, and that's going to be really fascinating. We'll be looking forward to that. We'll be adding it to our interactive Senate map. And I'm looking forward to that personally.
Absolutely. We'll be out next week with the first 4 of our Senate district races.
Can you tell us which ones they're going to be?
I will tell you that there are 2 upstate, 2 downstate, 2 currently held by Democrats, and 2 currently held by Republicans.
Oh, that's awfully bipartisan of you. I want to thank you very much, Steve Greenberg, for joining us.
Thank you, Liz.